In the name of the triune God, who calls each living creature beloved.
Amen.
Please be seated. I used to volunteer at a nonprofit called Break the Cycle, whose mission was to help teenagers protect and free themselves from dating and domestic violence. And they did this by teaching teenagers to understand the cycles of abuse and also their legal rights. And the idea was that if you understand how abuse works, how it perpetuates itself and what cycles it runs in, you can learn to interrupt it. And then you can use your legal rights to protect yourself further. And you know, we all know that violence and hatred tend to perpetuate themselves. Right? I mean, you can just think about how it works. Somebody feels wronged, and so they lash out, and that causes harm. And that person who feels harmed also begins to be angry and hate somebody else, and it just goes on and on and on. I mean, if you think about it, the Cold War and the arms race all counted on the fact that people would retaliate, because we relied on the idea that there would be mass assured destruction if even one person pulled the trigger. So that's how we were supposed to protect ourselves. You know, we all made thousands of nuclear bombs. You know, today, if you think about it, there are more refugees today than ever that we know of in the history of the world. Refugees are fleeing violence, which perpetuates itself again and again. Just yesterday, there was a group from St. John's who met at an apartment in northeast Minneapolis that we and 2 other churches have fully furnished and equipped with food and household goods, and we made the beds and everything for an Afghan refugee family who's moving in today. And we are doing that because it seems that these cycles of violence are completely out of control. And we don't know where is there an end in sight. And in the middle of all this, we have the teachings from Jesus from today's gospel reading. Jesus teaches about how to end cycles of violence without becoming hateful and violent ourselves. Love your enemies, he says. And Jesus is no hypocrite. In this same gospel, as Jesus is being crucified, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." But this teaching is profoundly difficult. You might even say it's problematic. Surely we cannot allow evil free rein or just passively accept abuse. It has been said by G.K. Chesterton, who's a British theologian, that the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. It's really hard to love your enemies. It's really hard to know what that means. There's a theologian named Walter Wink who spent years studying in South Africa and in Central and South America. He wanted to understand how oppressive regimes worked and to see if there was a way you could interrupt them. So he studied the military dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile and then the apartheid regime in South Africa. Observing what was happening in South Africa, he came to see that in his view, it was only the nonviolent resistance that was actually working there. And he was profoundly disturbed by the evil that he saw there and also by what he saw happening in Central America and South America, so much so that he became physically ill in the process of studying it. But nonetheless, despite all that, he emerged on the other side of these observations in a place of hope. And he used these very scriptures and what he saw, how he saw them playing out as his foundation for hope. He says, when Jesus says to turn the other cheek, it isn't for the sake of just inviting more abuse. When somebody backhands somebody else, that's generally a gesture of it's demeaning, it's not to an equal. But if you turn around and have to go this way, it's treating somebody as an equal. So he's saying that when Jesus asks you to turn the other cheek, it's demanding that the abuser see you as an equal. Similarly, when Jesus, in Matthew's version of this gospel, when Jesus says, when someone demands that you walk a mile with them, go 2. That was an ancient, it was a custom for Roman soldiers when they got tired of carrying their packs. They could conscript somebody to carry their pack for them, but only a mile. After that, they'd get in trouble. So Jesus was saying, carry it for them for 2 miles. And then that will force them to face what they're doing to you. When Jesus says, give your shirt to someone who takes your cloak, he's saying, strip down to be naked and give everything to them. It's a way to shame the person who's taking from you. In all these ways, there's a theologian and author named Matt Lynn who says what Jesus is teaching is to what he calls extend the 2 hands that heal. To do this. Say stop. And I invite better from you because I see your goodness. But how do we even get to the place where we can do that? These tactics of nonviolent resistance have been studied and used by amazing leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and other people who have led nonviolent resistance and nonviolent revolution. But how do we get to the love underneath those tactics that even lets you see to do this in the first place? I don't think we can start with the hardest things. I think we have to start with little everyday enemies, like your spouse who's bugging you, or like your neighbor who won't shovel your shared driveway ever. I was once meeting with somebody who was in a spiritual quandary, and they were seeking pastoral care. They felt really stuck. And in this place of kind of desperate stuckness, they asked me to do something for them that I felt was really inappropriate. And my first visceral reaction was, I honestly just wanted to leave. But for some reason, in that moment, I saw their inherent, innate goodness. And I think that was a gift of God. It's not that I, can do that all the time. But I felt that they were made for better than this. That who they really were was better than this. And so, in that moment, I felt able to stay there with them, not shame them, not demonize them, not blame them, also not say yes to that request. I can't always do that. But I remember how it felt. It's like riding a bike. I remember the spiritual feeling of seeing goodness in this person, even as they were operating out of an unhealthy place. I've never forgotten it. I've tried to keep seeing that way. I can't always do it. But here's the thing. I know that I'm often in a place of being on the other side of that equation, and that I sure hope that other people can see that in me when I need it. You've maybe heard about chaos theory, right? Totally switching subjects now. Chaos theory is this scientific discovery, really, that every single thing impacts every other thing in the cosmos. I don't understand how it works exactly. But scientists have discovered really truly that we are all interrelated, and that's just not an idea. It actually happens. But just because we all are interrelated and impact one another doesn't mean that we necessarily impact one another for good. It's one thing to be in relationship with others. It's an entirely other thing to be in right relationship with others. I believe that this being in right relationship is sensing our interdependence and sensing the good in others and acting from that place. That's love. That is what love is. It is the experience of sensing our profound interconnection and the profound goodness of all that has been made, and then choosing to act in a way that contributes to the common good, regardless of the cost to me. So, And a few weeks ago, actually, is it a few weeks ago? No. January 24th, I think, we did our annual meeting. And in the annual meeting, we engaged in some visioning exercises in which I asked you, if we had no obstacles at all, what would a flourishing St. John's look like in 1 year? And what would we have to let go of? And what would we have to embrace to make that happen? You'll be hearing a lot more about what you said. But among other things, there were 3 strong themes that emerged. One was a deep yearning to connect with each other again after this pandemic, but not just to connect in general, to connect in small groups about our faith, about our spiritual journeys, about making meaning in this world. Another was a desire to focus on joy, on the positive, and not just on, fighting things, fighting injustice. And finally, there was also a desire to make a real difference in this world. To not just talk about systemic racism or the need to take care of our creation, but to know that we're doing things that really make a difference. So these 3 things might seem to conflict a little bit. I mean, should we focus inward or outward? Should we fight injustice or focus on the positive? And as usual, it's not either or. It's always both and. But in fact, the church has a unique vocation. We are not a political action committee. We are not a secular social justice nonprofit. We have the charism and vocation of being a demonstration plot, a community practicing Jesus' 3rd way, practicing a different way of being. The writers of the New Testament, and Walter Wink also, saw institutions themselves as having a kind of spiritual essence or soul, if you will. You can call it corporate culture or the angel of the church that the author of Revelation talks about. But the collection of us is greater than the sum of the parts. This spiritual essence of St. John's is, I believe, crystallizing and clarifying. And it's about centering love. It's decentering the illusion that we're primarily a collection of individuals coming here to get our personal spiritual needs met, or individuals competing for scarce resources or whatever else, concerned primarily for ourselves and our families and our tribe. It's decentering selfishness of every kind, including European culture, whiteness as normative. It's centering a commitment to the flourishing of all beings by following Jesus' way of love together. And in case you didn't know, St. John's has this really terrific small book group on Wednesdays at noon that anyone can join. I think it's still on Zoom, if I'm not mistaken. Right now they're reading this book called Journey of the Universe, which explains recent science that sees the universe not only as a place, but as literally a story. And get this, scientists have discovered that some galaxies, like the Milky Way, are inherently generative because of their shape and the way energy moves through them. So they are always creating new stars, even as old stars die. I don't begin to understand the science of this, just read the book, you can believe me. But there are other kinds of galaxies that are not generative. Again, because it has something to do with the way they're shaped and the way energy moves through them. But the thing is, they've discovered that if you put a galaxy that is dying next to, in close proximity with a galaxy that is generative, the dying one will revive and start making stars. Again, I don't have the foggiest clue how this actually works. You will have to read the book, but that's profoundly hopeful. I believe the purpose of church is to be generative, to commit to the flourishing of all beings, to live in a different way. And like the galaxies I talked about, to get close to other individuals and institutions that perhaps are not flourishing, so that the love we experience here is contagious and catches on and spreads. If violence perpetuates itself, then let love do so more. If animosity and hatred are contagious, then let compassion and joy be even more so. Our purpose is to do all three things that you talked about in the visioning exercises, to form small groups centered in faith and spirituality in a way that changes us, to focus on the joy and positivity of our central message, which is the love of Christ, his third way, his nonviolent way, and through these things to participate in the ways God is already transforming our world in a way that actually makes a difference. Let us be a place where the negative energies of selfishness and accusation and polarization wither away and die, having nothing to feed them. Let us be a place where joy and seeing goodness and following Jesus' way of love happen in increasingly creative and generative ways, where each person does their small part and the whole is greater than the sum of our parts because God's Spirit is active and leading. Let us experiment and surprise one another with just how contagious love can become. Amen.